Every 2.1 years, the Earth and Mars are close to one another in their respective orbits, which means that spacecraft launching from the Earth to Mars require less energy to reach Mars. And since rockets are expensive to build, space agencies like to launch in that close period, which occurs every 2.1 years. And the most recent period occurred this past July. And on that occasion, 3 missions launched to Mars in the month of July. It was, I think it was about the most number of missions launched in a single, what's called a Mars launch window ever. So we had the United Arab Emirates first Mars mission launch from Japan in July, followed by China's first sort of solo Mars mission, the Tianwen-1, also a little bit later in July. And then finally the NASA Mars 2020 mission at the end of July 2020. They all, given the seven-month travel time from the Earth to Mars, they all arrived in February. So unlike the UAE and China and Chinese missions, the NASA mission never entered orbit. It just flew directly into the atmosphere, and it landed, and by all accounts, successfully. The term space race is a product of the Cold War, a very specific set of circumstances during the Cold War, where, you know, the United States and the Soviet Union both gave each other a run for their money. There was a lot of tit for tat things. You know, the Soviets went to orbit, then we went to orbit. They did a spacewalk, then we did a spacewalk. It was a very closely run thing, at least until the Apollo years. I think that today we're not quite there. The United States, frankly, is very far ahead in space technology relative to every other country. There isn't a sense in which we are being given a run for our money. That may change. I'm not saying we should be complacent, but I don't think it matches. I don't think it meets the criteria of being a space race. What I will say is that there are 4 sort of big trends bringing space back into policy discussions. The first one of those is that space technology has proliferated across many more countries. In the Cold War, the space game was really a US-Soviet thing. You know, even in 1966, only 6 countries had satellites in 1966, and today over 80 countries have satellites. You know, whereas, you know, orbital launch technology used to be dominated by the US and Russia, there are now, you know, in the neighborhood of 12 countries that can launch objects into Earth orbit. And these capabilities have brought space security into the policy discussion in Washington, D.C. in a major way. And of course, largely in response to these developments, the US government created the Space Force as a service branch of the US military in 2019. And then the final trend that I think is changing the game is that NASA has become a lot more ambitious. We're past the space shuttle years now, where we would just sort of float around in low Earth orbit and not do very much. We'd visit the space station, we'd perform little experiments in the space station. In conjunction with this renewed ambition on the part of NASA, there's been what I would describe as a legal offensive, a legislative offensive to lay the legislative groundwork for permanent US operations on the moon. So since 2015, there have been US laws passed passed by Congress, signed by the president, stating that the United States will commit to recognizing US citizens and US companies' right to exploit resources in space, whether that's on the moon or asteroids. More recently, at the end of the Trump administration, NASA got about, I think, 9 countries to sign what is known as the Artemis Accords, which is a non-binding multilateral agreement laying out etiquette for spacefaring nations, how they should behave if they end up bumping into each other during the course of their operations in orbit. And so that agreement, the Artemis Accords, it's mostly signed right now by US allies, none of which have that many space capabilities, but it is further evidence that the United States is thinking about resource collection in space and also protecting American space operations from the operations of other spacefaring countries. A US law passed in 2011, it's called the Wolf Amendment, named for a GOP congressman named Frank Wolf from Virginia. It prohibits NASA from cooperating with China without prior congressional authorization. It was passed as part of a budget package in 2011, signed by President Obama, and it was passed. Congressman Wolf put it in there in order to punish China for its human rights abuses and prevent it from accessing advanced, possibly dual-use space technologies. And while technically NASA could ask for congressional permission to do work with China, in practice, this law has created an almost complete firewall between the US and Chinese space programs. There are some narrow exceptions, but in practice, there is an almost complete firewall. The thing is, this law has not really prevented, it's not clear that this has prevented China from making impressive progress in space. Since 2011, they've launched a space station. They've landed probes on the moon. They're about to, they have a probe in orbit around Mars. They have a new heavy lift rocket, which is intended to take Chinese astronauts to the moon at some point. They have replicated the progress of the golden era of NASA, 1959 to 1969, in a remarkably short period of time. They've done a really good job, and so this law has not prevented that. At this point, I think you'd have to say, maybe 10 years ago it was different, but at this point it is clear the Chinese space program is the second most ambitious and probably the second most well-funded space program in the world. And they're going to start doing a lot of the same stuff that we're doing, and they already are. And so we're going to be bumping into them a lot more. And I think as a matter of sheer US national interest, we're going to have to revisit this law. It's going to become increasingly unsustainable.